On today's episode of the podcast, we have Keith D'Amelio. Keith is a visionary in the world of sports performance, a man whose expertise has shaped the careers of countless elite athletes. Keith's career spans roles with professional sports teams, including the NBA's Boston Celtics and the Toronto Raptors and Stanford University. We're going to explore his journey from a passionate student of athletic training to director of athlete performance at Nike, where he has worked with some of the greatest athletes on the planet. All of this is testament to his relentless pursuit of excellence. Keith has a PhD in applied sports science and has worked across almost every professional sport you can imagine, from the English Premier League, the NBA, NFL, and AFL. Keith has been instrumental in revolutionizing how athletes train, how they recover, and compete at the highest levels. In this episode, we discuss the traits of the greats, the late Kobe Bryant and NFL superstar Ndamukong Suh, and we explore the difference between the absolute best and the rest at the professional level. I hope you enjoy. Keith D'Amelio, welcome to Accelerating Excellence. Great to have you on, mate.
Man, thank you so much for having me. It's been a long time we've been talking about it, so super excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm buzzing for this one, mate. We're long overdue a catch up anyway, so this is the perfect place to do it. Can we kick off with you giving the audience some context of where it all began for you?
Sure. It's a really a story of just, I like to think luck and a combination of some hard work. But grew up in Boston, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and realized there going to university, I wanted to kind of explore. So I wanted to be someplace warm. I could play golf year round and have some fun. So I
those Boston winters.
Yeah, exactly. So I wound up, luckily enough, at Arizona State out in just outside of Phoenix.
Nice.
And just so happened, as I was trying to navigate, what I want to do with my life, and I've always been active, always played every sport, right? Arizona State at the time had one of the best exercise science programs in the country. And was like, well, that sounds cool, and I'll do that, and kind of went down that path. And one of my professors in my junior year, no, my sophomore year actually, said, hey, it was junior year. Interview somebody whose job you would like. And I reached out, cold called the head athletic trainer of the Phoenix Suns, Aaron Nelson. And it was Aaron's first year with the Suns as head athletic trainer. He had been there for an assistant prior, but had a great conversation and interview and what's it like being a head athletic trainer and all these things. And then I asked him just kind of out of the blue in the conversation, do you do any internship programs? And he said, we've never done it, but I do want to start it next year. So, hey man, I would love to have you. But I need you to go just get as much basketball experience as possible. And then, hit me when you're back. Great. Went back home to Boston for the summer. And that was when Boston, we still did the summer league. So what is now Las Vegas NBA Summer League, the mecca of, right? That actually started in Boston.
Oh, nice.
That was the biggest one. And fortunately for me, it was that time, right? So I, again, cold called the head athletic trainer of the Boston Celtics, Ed Lacert, left a voicemail, kind of told my story. He called me back and said, actually, yes, we do need your help this summer because we have summer league. So come down. Went down, busted my butt all summer working there with the Celtics and then at summer league. Went back out to Phoenix, called Aaron and said, I'm back. Let's start. And he said, oh, sorry, mate. We gave it to someone else while you were gone.
Oh, no.
I was just devastated. Luckily, that person, he's a good friend, Mike Elliott. He was with the Suns and in the NBA for a while. Good dude. But I was devastated. The Celtics actually found out and they said, look, when you graduate, you got a job here. So nice. I graduated and went right back to Boston with the hometown team and it was there for 5 years. So it was again, super fortunate that they answered just a random phone call. And then, I kind of took that opportunity and ran with it. And then, 25 years later, I've been working in and around pro sports in some capacity.
Oh, it's incredible. Again, it's unbelievable, isn't it? The power of just asking.
Yeah.
It's just unreal. I remember when I was studying, just having the cheek to email a few professors at Harvard at the time in the psychology side of things. And I almost, my jaw dropped that they even got back to me. I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know what to. I've got a phone call with them now. Shit, what am I gonna say? But it's
Yeah.
incredible what you can get from just, putting yourself out there, whether it's pinging out an email, turning up and asking for an opportunity, right? I love that story, Keith. And then, was there anything specific about the NBA that drew you? Because you talked about how interview the guy that's got the job you want. Was this a particular passion with basketball, or was it just,
No, I think it was just sport in general.
yeah,
I kind of in spending a lot of time in sport, even early on, but then even, throughout my career now, basketball is yeah, it's changing a little bit because sport is now, 365, especially at the elite level,
yeah,
like it's nonstop. Um, it's a little bit conducive or more conducive than some of the other sports for having like a family life
yeah?
in some capacity. There's a ton of travel and there's a lot of stuff going on, and pro sports is very difficult from a family perspective. But a lot of days are done relatively early, so you can still be home with your family at night, at least when you don't have games. And I didn't know any of that at the time, and nor did I have a family, so it wasn't a factor that I considered.
What was
But I
most
just like
important to you at that stage of your career?
I think just getting as much experience as possible.
Got you.
Like just trying to put myself out there. Gives actually it was a learning experience too early on because at that time I was sports medicine focused, and that's what I was athletic trainer at Arizona State in the exercise science department, and that's the route I was going when I was with the Celtics. When I started with the Celtics, I was the assistant athletic trainer, but I actually realized super early on that's not actually what I want to do. I don't want to be on the medical side. I really want to be on the more performance related side. And we had a strength coach when I started with the Celtics, Sean Brown, who's still a super close friend. Um, and Sean kind of helped me navigate some stuff. And then I realized, you know what, I'm going to get my master's in that, in S&C, in sport performance. And that's the path I'm going to go down. And that's, where I wound up going with the Raptors. So I was head strength coach with the Toronto Raptors for 4 years.
Again, so it's that learning by doing, getting in there, getting
Yeah,
stuck in, and then reflecting on what's resonating, and then pivot in that direction. Yeah.
yeah, if needed, right? And then even post that added my PhD, albeit several years later, but I was exploring that world, and the way I look at it now is it served me well, right? I have all these, at least from a institutional learning, those backgrounds, but then adding all the practical experience with it as well to as I describe people to people now when they're like, well, what do you do? I'm like, try and solve problems,
Yeah.
right? And you like pull on my experiences and my education and all of these things. So I think it's actually it's good that I kind of navigated the path along the way.
Yeah, and if you found it beneficial having worked across multiple sports, I certainly feel like it's one of the best things I've ever had is being able
Yeah,
to work cross domain because people often ask like, is there an iconic institution, organization you've seen that just does everything right? I'm just like, hell no. But there are organizations and teams that do certain bits really well, and one of the best ways you can therefore learn is by being exposed to as many as possible, right? How was that for
yeah.
you?
It that is I couldn't agree more. Like that's been the best um, growing experience for me is to expose myself to all of these different sports, whether that be you know football clubs over in the UK and the
Yeah,
EPL, NFL clubs, NBA. And look, when I was in the trenches in the NBA, Celtics, Raptors, and then when I left the Raptors, I was at Stanford men's basketball. And while it was basketball, it had a unique twist because it was collegiate basketball. And
yeah.
then it was even more of a twist because it was at Stanford, where you had an academic institution, and then the players that make up that team, which is much different than a lot of the big teams. Um, but then when I left sport and went to Nike for 13 years, it was kind of exposing to everything. And I say that, I became a much better practitioner because of just what you explained. Like I was able to see and kind of cherry pick in some ways some of the best of what each individual club was doing to then try and help other clubs. And now with my role with consulting and clubs and athletes across the globe, I'm able to say like, well, I see that's your problem. And I understand like this is how you typically approach it, but here's a really interesting idea that they're doing over there in, South African rugby and or wherever it may be, right?
Yeah.
And how can that play into it? I also, with some of my roles with the teams I consult with, it's hiring staff in the recruitment
Yes.
process. And one of the things now I'm really, really, I look for is I want to bring people with those different backgrounds and experiences around, because they're going to look at problems with a little bit of a different approach that may add some value. Because again, not only does everybody ask me like the same thing you do, who's doing it best? The other, which is just a common question. The other one too is like, well, yeah, but this is just how we do it. And I was like, no, that
That's
can't be
rife, isn't it, in a
branding.
lot of the top sports? Yeah, I mean, I don't know anyone that's worked with as many, elite tip of the spear athletes across as many sports as you have. And it's fascinating. It's something I always enjoy when we catch up. It is getting a download from you on what's happening. I mean, in terms of your early career, what do you think the strengths were that enabled you to excel? You talked about the word problem solver, and effectively, I guess that's what any elite performer is, right? You're there to solve problems.
Sure.
Um, but was there anything from a personality perspective or cognitive strengths between those ears that?
Yeah. Well, I think some, and then we can have a conversation on whether or not they're strengths or not. But I think, you know, a curiosity. I
Yeah,
think I've always just been super curious and explore different areas, and not um, really ever being beholden to like one train of thought.
yeah,
Right. And I think certainly if we talk about the world of like S&C and performance, that can be so just like controlling of a thought process where like, well, no, this is how we train. And then they disagree with anyone who doesn't train like that. Like I've just
mhm.
never had that. There's a lot of different ways to do stuff. And like, what can I learn from you that maybe I can put into my toolbox to help me with the athletes or whoever it is that I'm working with? So I think there's a level of curiosity and just openness that I've always had. Um,
And I think that the thought that kept jumping into my head when you were talking there as well is that doing what everyone else does in your league doesn't give you an edge.
No, not at all. I think there's good things to learn from people who are doing some really good things, but like I don't want
Sure.
to just do it the way they're doing it. And one of the things I always say to teams, management now, when they're like, oh, like we want to do it like this team. I'm like, yeah, but you can't do it like that team. You're not that team. You don't have the same players. You don't have the same coaches. You don't have the same infrastructure. Like if you try to just do what they do, it won't work the same way. You might get some benefits, but we need to figure out how can we craft it to what you have in this environment and then maximize. Again, we can take good ideas from it, but we have to make it our own. We have to build upon it. I think the other aspect that I do think helped me was just a work ethic, right? Like I had no problem being there for 18 hours a day if I needed to be there for 18 hours a day. And that was before I got into sport. That was growing up and working, and I just like to work. I like to do stuff. And it's something that I try and talk to my two boys about now, who are 13 and 11. But it's tough because one, I'm just dad, and they're like, ah, be quiet, like stop talking. But I
Yeah.
don't know how to, like, I'm trying to figure out how to instill it, because outside of my grandfather, who's the most influential person in my life, um, he never really talked to me about it, but it was something that I always just like, whatever it is that I was trying to do, I was trying to be the best at. And whether that was working in a flower shop when I was in high school growing up, like I wanted to be there and I want to just kill everything I'm trying to do that day, to whatever it is I was trying to do in sport, whatever my role was. So I think that definitely served me well. I'd like to think. And then the part that I jokingly said there at the beginning of, we can debate if it's a strength or not, is just a willingness to maybe not always follow the rules and maybe push back on some things that don't really make sense.
Yeah.
So I was never afraid to push back when something just didn't make sense, and just ask questions, because again, at the end of the day, like my goal was to get to the best possible answer, best possible outcome, and I wasn't afraid to push it if I needed to push. It didn't always work out in my favor, like flat out. Like there were many times where whether they were arguments, whether they were disagreements, and then sometimes just whether whoever it be, myself, the general manager, just butting heads, and because I was never afraid to push the envelope, because I wanted to get to the best result regardless of how we got there.
Brilliant. And I guess those strengths almost, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned very briefly about Australia, because talk about diverse well, a few things. Talk about diverse sports. Talk about shit weather in winter in Boston. You, I don't know which was it that propelled you, but you did your PhD over in Australia, didn't you? And you worked in some of the, I guess, more niche Aussie sports as well, right?
Yeah, I actually Australia has a little bit longer of a story because I did a good portion of my junior year at Arizona State in Australia, in Perth, out
Got
at
you.
Edith Cowan. So did that, which was just amazing, right? And it was prior to the Sydney Olympics, so it was kind of booming and everything, but it was still small. Um, and again, Perth gave me a real Australian feel. Like Sydney's amazing, Melbourne's amazing cities, but they're big cities. Perth was at the time still pretty small city, again, completely isolated. So it was an unbelievable experience. But yeah, doing my PhD at UTS, and again, I spent a fair bit of time there, but I did it based here in the States, and again, just got exposure to some of the rugby clubs down there, AFL, cricket. My PhD is with the NBA in using the NBA's data for quantifying the physical performance within the NBA. But that one also, that was, if we talk about how I wound up in sport, that was kind of another sort of very fortuitous opportunity for me in Aaron Coots, who's, kind of a world-renowned sports scientist and a very, very close friend. He saw me working on a project and just doing some things for an NBA team. And he was like, mate, this is a PhD. And I was like, yeah, whatever. Like, I wasn't chasing a PhD.
Got you.
And then finally, he came back to me and he was like, well, what if you got a scholarship to do it? And at that point, like, okay, you've removed all potential excuses for me to not pursue it.
Beautiful.
I guess I need to pursue it. So again, it was a little bit of luck, and then just kind of put my head down and got it done.
Amazing. And you talked about your grandfather as well, but I was going to ask you, who have been the most influential people that have perhaps helped instill those strengths, or even, inject a bit of belief in you like that in terms of challenging you to like, hey, why don't you, because effectively what you're saying there is, look, why don't you level up and go to the next level in this, right?
Yep.
What are some of the most significant people that have perhaps played that role for you?
Yeah, my grandfather, no question. I mean, just growing up and just observing, which now later in life I can reflect on that. At the time I didn't realize, but but always
Just
just
sort of
looked
leading
at
by
him.
example.
Yeah, exactly, and it was just super close with him. Um, and then I've been fortunate enough to just have a lot of people in my life, and one thing I've always, I've even as far back as I can remember, right, high school, I've always read like the sort of self-help and business improvement. Like I just find that stuff fascinating, right? So I've always had that, like, a mindset of like, how can I continue to get better? And as far back as I can remember, I've always tried to have what I call a board of advisors around me, of just
Uh-huh.
mentors from different walks of life and different things, and that I can lean on in certain times, and who will also push me, and kind of challenge me at times. One in particular who I know we've talked about, Ndamukong Suh.
Yeah.
He's an athlete I've worked with for upwards of 14 years now. And while he's an amazing athlete, no question,
Do you
he's
very
just
quickly just give some of the British listeners a some context of what an athlete this guy is?
yeah. So watch Sky Sports, because he's a pundit, as you call it, Sky
Yeah.
Sports for the NFL when they're there. But yeah, he's arguably one of the most dominant defensive tackles in the NFL, like in history. Certainly since he came into the league in 2010. But he's just a freak athlete, right? Like a lot of the guys that
Hmm.
play at that level. There's no
Freak
question.
of the
They're
freaks,
all.
though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, he's 300 pounds, 6'4", runs like a deer, and is just athletic, right? You just don't see guys
Yeah.
that big that move that way. But he's just an amazing person, right? And he is the absolute definition of what a professional is in all aspects. And so to be,
Accomplished
you know,
businessman as well, right?
yeah, very accomplished. And again, he's I've said it multiple times that professional athletes, especially when you're one of the best, it just gives you a platform to do some things that Look, a lot of people just don't have that opportunity, flat out. Like it's right or wrong, but not a lot of athletes that use it, not in a sort of a bad way, but they don't take full advantage of it. And he has really stepped through. Again, that's a bit of his personality. He always wants to be better. He's always pushing himself in every aspect, surrounding himself, much like I just said about myself, surrounding himself with amazing mentors and people that he can lean on and learn from. We approach things very similar. And I think that's why we've grown so close, because he is like family now. But I'd put him on that list of people who've constantly challenged me and pushed me, even if he wasn't doing it on purpose. Like, he would just force me, because I'm like, shoot, if I have to keep up with him, if I have to bring my A game, because I know he's going to bring
You're
his
his
A game.
performance guy, right?
Yep.
That's some role to fill, right?
Yeah, and it's been great. It's also, at the same time, it's somewhat, you know, um, warped my perception of working with some of the elite performers, because some of these
Sure.
guys and girls, they are amazing at what they do, but they're amazing just based on their raw talent. And it's the real special ones are the ones who can combine, like, just being a pro and looking at all areas that they're trying to maximize, not just going out and getting by on talent. And so to have kind of a front row seat in that relationship with him over the last 14 years, when I now work with a few other ones, I'm like, man, why doesn't this athlete get it? It can be a little bit more
Well, he's
frustrating.
certainly taught you what the standard is, right? Which means you can, I guess, hold the people you're working with to that standard even better, right?
Yep.
And it leads me to a question I love asking people, but this one is especially for you, because I don't think I know anyone who's worked with as many elite athletes. And when I say elite, we're talking about guys like Ndamukong, who's the absolute top in some of the most competitive leagues. But if you had to pick one performer you've worked with to compete for your life, who would it be?
I mean, it would be Ndamukong.
It
I
would.
mean, there's yeah, the level of commitment he brings to everything he does, anything he does, is
Yeah.
just it's tough to describe. It honestly is. It's and he hates when I kind of talk about it like that, and I don't really talk about him that much, to be honest. But he's just special. And if you're talking about something like my life depends on it, like, hey,
That's the
dude,
guy.
you're getting tapped. There's
Yeah.
there's a couple guys, that I and again, I've been fortunate enough to maintain really good relationships with the athletes I've worked with. And there's a couple of guys from my NBA days, Anthony Parker, Jose Calderon, Jason Capono, just guys that are just genuinely friends, like very close friends now. And they were amazing to work with. And I would definitely, if I needed something, I'd go to them. And they are in that same capacity, right? Like, especially AP. Like, if I've got something I want to bounce off him, he's got a really good perspective on things. But if you're talking about something my life depends on it, it's
Yeah.
in addition to just his size and the sheer,
Yeah,
like,
that's and isn't it?
that he's going to bring to the table.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't fancy that.
yeah.
Okay, cool. And then just as a quick follow-up to that, then those individuals you mentioned, you talked about some of the things. Is there anything else, or like if you had to break it down to two or three things that just separate those individuals? Because the individuals you're dropping there, again, they're outliers amongst the outliers, isn't it? But you've worked with the individuals that at that level, and then a level below, that perhaps had the talent but haven't excelled to the extent they did. From your experience, what is the difference?
I think there's a couple things, but I think, one, there's the raw physical talent. And again, at that level, that usually isn't the separator. It can be for a little bit, for sure.
Yeah.
No question. But usually it's what they bring to the table with the mental approach, and like how they focus on things, and how they, just how they prepare, all of the things that go into that. I also think the way that I've been talking about it lately with a few people is, I think a lot of times elite athletes, even ones who are very, very good, right? They're amazing talent and they're performing at a high level, but they're very passive in the process, right? Like because at that level, there's so much that's just done for them.
Mm-hmm.
They allow it to just be done for them. And the ones I think that really separate themselves, they're very active in that process. They're not passive in that process.
Oh, that's a brilliant point.
I always say that my role, is to help educate athletes so they're better consumers of information about themselves, right? Whether that's their body, whether that's nutrition, whatever it is. Like, and even in Dominican, if Dominican tomorrow says, "Hey, we're done," I'm not working with you anymore, that happens. But I know the next person he works with in that capacity, they better have their shit together, because he is going to ask questions and hold them accountable. And if they don't have answers to them,
Yeah.
well, that's going to be a problem. And that's my goal with every athlete, is I want them to be, it's even athletes I work with their teams. I'm like, and they're like, yeah, well, my team's having me do this. I'm like, did you ask them why? I'm like, well, no. I'm like, yeah, but shouldn't you understand why they're asking you to do that? And again, and then if they can't answer that question, well, that tells you something too. Right. And I think by being more active in the process, athletes can also filter out some of the bullshit that actually is being put around them and asked of them. So I think that's really one of the things that I see that helps separate the best from the good, is they're just way more active in the entire process of how they approach things.
That's brilliant insight. And Keith, would you give us some, like, at a top level, how does it look in terms of the work that you do with athletes? I know a lot of the work you do is at the organizational level with a team in terms of putting that performance team in place. But with the athlete themselves, like, what is it you're looking for them in the relationship? You're obviously a source of expert. You're there to, show them a way forward. But what are some of the things you expect from them in terms of that working relationship?
Yeah, again, I expect a level of commitment, right? Because if I'm going to commit to working with an athlete, like, I'm all in, like, I'm going to give you everything I got, and I need that back from you. If I feel like you're just kind of half-assing it, or just, again, not being active in the process, it is just really tough for me to work with you, because I'm going to also ask a lot of you, more so than probably anyone who's ever worked with some of these athletes, in terms of what I'm going to actually have them do. Some of it is different than they've ever done before, whether that be from in the training aspect of it. Okay, great. Maybe I do some different exercises that they've ever done. Okay, fine. That's not a big deal. But some of the things are just different, and getting them to understand that and be active in that process is really sort of a non-negotiable for me. Like, I have no problem telling athletes, like, yeah, I'm not the right person for you. Like, if this is how you're going to approach it, like, I'm not, because at the end of the day, I think then I'm doing myself a disservice. I think I'm also doing an athlete a disservice, because I can only give them 20%.
Yeah.
We're only going to accomplish 20% of what we could accomplish. And is that really fair to them? Like, just go do something with someone else. Right. I just, it doesn't sit well with me. And that's, getting them to also understand how it is all connected. Right. I've actually just had this conversation recently with an athlete, and they didn't get it. And I got to what I just said of, like, well, then this isn't right for us, is getting them to understand that this isn't just like an off-season workout. This is a year-long, like, journey and plan, because I'm not just getting you ready for, like, the start of training camp. I'm getting you, we're preparing you not only for a long career, but for the playoffs that are happening in 9 months from now. We're doing that today. We're not going to do that, the week before the playoffs, which is, unfortunately,
Way too
that's how I
late.
think a lot of teams, how a lot of teams approach it, right? They're very, and look, I do understand that to a certain extent, right? Because when you're in the team and you're in the weeds, you got tomorrow's practice, you got this week's game, you've got, like, you don't always have the time to look down the road. I'm fortunate that I do. But
That's a big
because
part
of
of
that,
your role, right? For the athlete
yeah,
to be that individual.
right. But that's a foreign concept to a lot of athletes. They
Yeah.
they don't they don't think like that. So getting them
It's
to
quite clear that,
really,
when you look across the leagues, whether it's EPL or NFL, NBA, the athletes that are engaging people like yourselves um, are clearly the ones that are the things you're talking about. They're more active. They're more taking ownership and taking the lead in their own career. And
Yep.
no shit, guess what? They're the ones that are the top end, aren't they, in their
Yep.
league? Funny
Yeah,
that.
it is. It's that it's, I think sometimes, you can also look at some teams, right?
Yeah.
And not to speak ill of some teams, but you wonder sometimes, okay, talent is, yes, okay, talent always helps, no question. But teams that are always performing at a high level, like it's not coincidence. Like there's something that they're doing that is part. And on the teams that are always shit, there's also a reason why they're shit. Like
Performance
there's
is
not,
never a coincidence.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And
100%.
when you know what happens behind the scenes, you're like, yeah, I should have seen you guys should have seen
One
that coming.
day in 5 years, maybe we'll have to get a few beers and do a podcast episode where we can, yeah, we'll need some sick lawyers, but to what really goes on behind some teams and others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But again, back to that point, like it's amazing. Like if you look back and again, this is when I was in the NBA and you talk about that long-term planning, right? And it's usually not there in sport because sometimes it's just it's tough. And then to get athletes to think like that, okay, tough. To get coaches to think like that,
Yeah,
very tough, right? Because they are so, one game at a time, and in the next two games they lose, they're out. But if you
yeah.
look back,
Ruthless.
the San Antonio Spurs are the ones I love to talk about because Pop is he's just different. Um, and back in their heyday, right, when they were like however many years it was, the Western Conference Finals and everything, it was nuts. You would always see they would just start out and just be number one seed, number two, right around the
Yeah,
top of the table in the Western Conference, and then in about January they would tank and they would lose a bunch of games, and everyone was like, oh, it's especially as the years went on, like, oh my, their Spurs dynasty is over, and then they'd come back and they would just finish the season like on a rocket ship, and it was strategic. Like like they did that on purpose, whether that was like resting guys or trying different
yeah,
things. Like they did it on purpose with the goal of being there to play for a championship, and you just don't see that too often. And so again, back to kind of how I work with athletes, like just to try to get them to understand the process and the length of that process. Like it is not off season, it is not week to week, it is not even one season at a time if you're really doing it right. Um, but that is tough to get people to understand because they've never really thought about it like that.
yeah. And in terms of, I guess your career so far, is there like a peak experience for you? Something I describe as a blue head moment, maybe a period of time, maybe it was a season, maybe it was a couple of weeks where you felt like you and whoever you were working with at the time, you were just cooking with gas.
Um, Nothing that really stands out like that. I mean, there's a couple
Yeah.
like really special moments for sure. I think there's been a couple of light bulb moments for me. One early on in the Celtics, seeing, which is unfortunately still the case in a lot of organizations, but seeing the different areas within the building, S&C, sports med, and not even speak to each other,
Right.
and just like nothing, not a hello, not a good morning, like nothing. And just being able to step back and be like, wow, it's probably not the most ideal working environment, but also it's probably the worst thing for the care of the athlete because they're the ones that are suffering. And I think that really sort of changed my mindset moving forward to try and like really be collaborative. I think in my role now, having the experience of being in the team setting, like in sitting in that chair and dealing with the coach yelling at you and the GM doing this and all of the things that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis in that team environment. But yet now I'm removed from it and I can kind of pop in and be like, hey, yeah, but I've never forgotten that. So trying to also manage that, whether that's at the team level when I'm consulting it, from an organizational standpoint, or with the individual athletes I'm working with, right? And a lot of times in the private sector, some of the people working with athletes, I don't want to say they don't have great motives. They do. I'd like to think they're trying to help that athlete, but maybe they go about it the wrong way, right? Because they're trying to use that for, again, marketing. They're trying to use it. That's their golden
Sure.
goose. So they don't want anything to happen. So they're very, very protective. And they almost create like an adversarial relationship with the team.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the only one that suffers is the athlete. So trying to sort of approach it from a very, very collaborative standpoint with the team. I don't give a shit about credit. I don't care about it. Like, guys, you like, how can I help you? You know, from where I can. And I think that approach there has served me well. There's only been a couple of instances where, you know, the team didn't want me there. They were, you know, I don't want to say threatened, but they didn't like the fact that their athlete was working with me.
Yeah.
But for more often than not, it's been phenomenal. And I think once the team, you know, staff recognizes like, oh, actually, like Keith understands what we're doing, and Keith is trying to like, it's just such a better working environment. And again, I'd like to think that the athlete benefits from that.
And again, there's a clear trend, aren't there, with the top players in the top leagues across multiple sports, again, North America and Europe, that is increasing, isn't it? The rate of people working with people
It
in that
is.
capacity. I think it's something that probably the right clubs are starting to support because they're seeing the upside in it. And the big one we sort of see in psychology actually as well is you speak to a lot of individuals at these teams and they have fears about speaking to the club psychologist because ultimately they work for the club and the
Yep.
club have to, like you said, there's stakeholders, there's commercial aspects. It's like, well, if I tell them I'm got this issue with anxiety, am I going to get my contract renewed? Am I going to do that? So the issue with that is that everyone suffers because then the
Yeah.
club get a player who's 70, well, at best 70% of what they're capable of. And then the athlete themselves obviously doesn't gets the same thing, and it's no good for anyone, right? So I think there's some pluses to have that sort of safe space, a true safe space with
Yep.
the external sort of someone in the middle there. But in terms of one of the questions I'd love to ask you again, in terms of like the breadth of athletes and the amount of elite athletes you've worked with, who for you, when it's in terms of that, I describe it as like flicking that on switch, when it's time to train, time to compete, can just go from zero to like nothing else exists on this planet apart from this training session or this game? Is there someone that stands out? And we're not allowed to say Ndamukong.
Yeah, there's definitely a few. You know, I'm fortunate enough to I work with Damian Lillard. Dame is he's as hard as a worker as you're going to see, and again, we're working on getting him to be more active in the process. But he is, you know, you put a ball out there or you make it a competition, and you see a switch go.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
having seen, you know, I've never worked with him directly, but I have been around him quite a bit. Um, LeBron is like that to a certain
Right.
extent.
Okay. Yeah, I can
Kobe
imagine.
was, yeah, Kobe was like that, you know, and again, getting to sort of see him up close.
Kobe is
You
my
know,
favorite, by the way. Like I listened to the guy talk on some of the interviews he did, and I'm like, dude, this guy's like a philosopher, PhD,
yeah,
performance scientist, psychologist. It is frightening the amount of substance to every sentence he speaks when he talks about the mindset he brings to competition and training. I encourage anyone listening to, just smash in Kobe Bryant motivation or performance, and you'll get these reels of just
it's unbelievable. And I still find myself listening to a bunch of that stuff because he's always been, just an athlete that I've really
mm. And I'm
loved
not a big
watching.
basketball guy, but he just probably my favorite athlete of all time from that perspective.
Yeah, probably I would say the same. And, you know, again, super fortunate. You know, I was there my first year with the Raptors.
That's amazing.
Uh, we were playing the Lakers at Staples, you know, at the time Staples. Um, and that's when he put 81 on us. And I got a front row seat to watch him drop 81 points, and it was
Incredible.
unbelievable.
Iconic
Uh,
moments.
but he's an athlete that, again, one 2008 was with Team USA, and I was with, we had Chris Bosh, so I was with Bosh, and Kobe and his guy, his trainer were in the weight room, and Kobe would I could see the conversation, but then he asked me too. He's like, "Why were you doing that?" And again, we get back to sort of
Yeah,
the
the
active
sense.
role and things like
Yeah.
it was something different, but he wanted to know why I was doing that with CB, and that struck a chord with me because I'm like, most athletes would never come over and ask why I was doing this, but when I explained my answer, he sat there, like, listened to it all. And like, you could see he was really like trying to figure out, like, is there something that I can maybe benefit from? Like, it was
Yeah.
a sort of active thought process. You could see. So he's definitely one
I always
that's
describe that as like second level thinking, and it's something I think all elite performers have. It's that I need to understand the why. I want to break this down just to understand how it works. If we put it back up together, and it's sort of, it's I think the way you've shared that with us is just such an important point for people listening to take on board, whether it's to try and bring more of that out in yourself or the people you're leading, or even in the talent identification perspective,
yep.
right? When you're screening for people, look for that second level thinking, people that are asking those sorts of questions.
Yeah.
Um,
And I, I'm fortunate enough to the last 3 years I've worked with New York Liberty.
yeah.
And they're we're hopefully we're gonna kind of take this one home this year, but they've got a few athletes, Sabrina, one of them, who is on that same path. And it's funny because Sabrina and Kobe got to have a close relationship, which is documented, as kind of a little bit of a mentor of hers,
Yeah.
before he passed. But she's that same way, right? Like, goes
Okay.
hard, but you can see the curiosity in things when she's trying to do something or work on a move or just try and get better.
I heard
So
Kobe was
there's
ruthless as well in terms of the people he'd spend time with. So I imagine that is testament to Sabrina that yeah, she certainly has that gear.
yeah. So I think there's a bunch of athletes, but it's the the ones like that really stand out. They just stand out in and amongst a bunch of athletes that stand out, right? That are at a level, operating at a high level, but the ones that have that approach mentally to it is they're different. They're different.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt the podcast, but before we dive deeper into the conversation, I want to express how grateful I am that you're voluntarily choosing to spend your time here with us. I also want to take a moment to ask for your support. I want to bring you the best podcast I can in terms of guests, engaging discussions, and thought-provoking conversations every week. And that's where you come in. By hitting that like button and subscribing to the podcast, you play a vital role. Simply put, when you hit that like button or subscribe, you enable the podcast to reach a much wider audience. And the wider the audience, the easier it is for guests within my network to convince their agents, management teams to free up their diary and come on the show. Thank you in advance for your likes and subscriptions. Now, let's get back to business. Last thing on Kobe, by the way, I just want to say to you that stuck with me as well was a story. Obviously, he played with Shaq, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that because Shaq's a unit, right? And I
Yes,
heard
yes.
one of the things that really impressed me was apparently Shaq was, cutting corners, perhaps in training, and said something snappy to Kobe. And apparently Kobe did like literally fists. Right, we're going. I'm not tolerating that. And he's literally picking fights with someone like Shaq to enforce the standards. That's the extent to which he believed in that. And I remember then listening to an interview with Shaq saying, like, I was like, oh my God, that's how much this guy cares. He's literally going to start fight with me about these standards to enforce it. I'm not suggesting, by the way, everyone listening, should go and start fights with people. But you know what I mean? It's just to
Yeah.
do, to do whatever Shaq's probably like after Ndamukong, one of the second last person you maybe want to do that with.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. No, I mean, again, that's it's a testament to Kobe that he was, and he backed it up, right? He at least by all accounts, and I've had players, that I've worked with who've played with him, and yeah, like, it was no joke. Like, if you didn't bring it, and again, a lot of things you hear about MJ, uh, same thing, right? Like,
yeah.
just LeBron, same thing. Like, some of the stories, which I can imagine coming out of the Olympics right now,
Yep.
right? And early on, I don't know if you've seen some of those stories where, Steve Kerr is the head coach, and the first couple of days of practice, LeBron's going hard, and LeBron's the oldest guy on the team, and obviously
Yeah.
is everything in his career. And Steve just, Ty Lue and Eric Spoelstra, Miami coach and Clippers coach respectively, but both who coached LeBron, Steve turned to them both and he's like, is he practice like this all the time? Like, is this normal? And they're like, yeah, every day. Like,
Yeah.
this is, and again, that's
Brilliant.
it not only keeps him operating at a high level. I'd like to think that's part of,
Yeah.
but forces his teammates to, because if you're not going to perform to the best of your ability, look, you're not going to be LeBron, but can he get the best out of you? It's only going to also somewhat self-serving, it's going to help him win, because if his teammates rise to that, to the best of their ability,
Absolutely.
it can help. Which I try to get that across to my 13-year-old, James. It's not hitting home just yet. It's not hitting home. We'll see. We'll see.
No, I'm sure he's not going to struggle with that. 13's an awkward age, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of, I guess the other side of that I'd love to get your experience on is there's obviously those moments in games, big games, but then also just in life as well, like significant emotional events or significant decisions in games that can throw people. And some people, I so often talk about mastering the art of not panicking. Is there anyone that stands out, or what's your experience about individuals or that are best able to deal with that?
Yeah. Again, I think it's the ones who, I don't want to say are committed to the process, right? But who again, they understand that it is a process.
Yeah.
And so they don't maybe sometimes get caught up in the roller coaster that is sport, and that can be life too, right? I think they just have a lot more level, headedness, or just like ability to control those emotions in that time period. Again, we talk about Kobe, obviously, the amount of game-winning shots or pressure that was put on him. LeBron as well, like, coming up with the pressure that he had as an 18-year-old coming to the league, like, and then be able to surpass any level of expectation that was put on him. Like, that takes a level of mental fortitude and strength that, like, I don't even know how to deal with that. It's one thing, we talk about that, but it's also what I love to do with athletes is get athletes from different sports together.
Yes.
And I love to do it because they can learn from each other a lot of what we're talking about there,
Yeah.
far more than I can talk to them. Like, I can talk to them about some things, but again, I'm not a sports psychologist. That's your world, and some really good practitioners in there. But in the field of performance, again, you do become very, very close with them. And some of those stuff does have a psychological underpinning. But when you see athletes interact with each other and learn
Yeah.
from each other, like, I've worked with Ndamukong and other countless other NFL players, but I have no idea what it's like to play on Sunday.
Yeah.
I don't. I've worked in the NBA for however, in and around the NBA for 25 years. I don't know what it's like to really, when that ball gets tipped up in front of 17,000, at 7 o'clock at night. And so when they can talk to each other and trade ideas about how they approach things and what they deal with, like, that is where I just step out of the way and let them go. And it's been awesome those times. And whether it's a track and field, Olympic track and field athlete, an AFL athlete, it's just, they can always learn something from each other that goes far beyond what I can ever talk to them about.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful. I know, like, you and I have had offline conversations about the value in it when we've sort of arranged some stuff. And I think even at the managers level, I've seen that, bringing leaders together, from someone who's leading maybe an elite military unit, to someone who's leading a hedge fund, to someone who's leading an international sports team. You get them in the room, you get them talking. It's like they're all trying to solve the same problems.
Yep.
Managing up, managing down, conflict, a new generation. I think there's so much value in it. I mean, do you think mentorship as a tool is being leveraged well enough in the sports that you've been working across? Or do you think maybe teams and organizations are missing a trick there?
I think they're missing. I think
Yeah.
that there's a huge miss in and again, in all aspects, like you mentioned, that from a management perspective,
Yeah.
like having some, and maybe, well, some of it is mentorship, but I think also just development,
Yeah.
right? Like, a lot of the things that go into sport, in some ways in life, whether it's corporate America, and again, having lived in both worlds and been able to actually, again, back to our earlier part of this conversation, being able to cherry pick like some good ideas from all of it to influence both. But you know, some of the competencies that you are supposed to have as a manager, as a coach, as like, no one really teaches you. So it's like, how do you, and it's one thing that I'm really playing with right now, is like, how do you actually develop some of these world-class, business schools, like, and the art of negotiation, the art of like communication, the art of like all of these things that there's leaders in who can teach, like,
Yeah.
some of these, the people's in those roles taking advantage of learning to just improve their skills.
Yeah.
You know,
Even just
they're,
the art of coaching, right? I did a
yeah,
podcast,
exactly.
we had Sir Clive Woodward on the
Yep.
podcast. And one of the things he said is like, there's been some incredible ex-rugby players that have managed it, international, for England that have failed. And it's not because they didn't have the hardware. It's because they've just not been taught how to teach,
Yep.
how to coach. And he sort of talked about how having his teaching degree taught him these skills that he didn't learn through playing international rugby or professional rugby. And I
No,
think it's so true. I've had conversations as well with Premier League managers. I'm talking managers here that have won multiple Champions Leagues. I've sat in rooms with them and talked to them about, we've had conversations about skill acquisition and optimizing training design and emotional control. And they've literally said like, look, I've done all my coaching badges and all you're taught is tactical stuff, this formation, high press, low block, blah, blah. And, they're not taught, the process of acquiring skills, communication. And it feels like there's a gap there that if we could shift the baseline, Lord knows what might happen actually to the average standard of play. And again, another level of shift in performance.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think there's so many different aspects to it, right?
Yeah. I think you see
But
the
even
business world as well, right? You get leaders in business who are like, and I've certainly worked with a few in trading and investing who are incredible investors or incredible traders, but then by virtue of that, and now run the shop or the show.
Mhm.
And they've got skill gaps because whilst you're an expert in the primary craft, it doesn't necessarily make you an expert when it comes to predicting superstars, getting them up the curve, solving the human problems that will come up, and then injecting your levels of confidence, intensity into the team. That they're all very different skill sets.
Yeah, and again, where I'm struggling with at the moment, because I couldn't agree more, and trying to with a couple of the teams I work with, is like, okay, how do we build out that? How do we inject this focused work to help, again, whether it's coaches, like become better coaches. Like again, there's some really interesting like educational learning out there. Like how do you actually teach better? And so now, okay, you're getting your athletes to understand the concepts. Your film review is way more efficient and impactful. You're all of these things. Like
Yeah.
there's ways in which to do that. But I'm struggling with trying to like get it over the hump, right? Because it's just a different approach, and you have to have, whether it be a coach who's open to maybe admitting that what they're doing isn't the best,
Yeah.
or being comfortable with someone else coming in as the expert,
I think
which
in some
looks.
of these areas, because it's so not done, there's almost this unconscious incompetence. It's like we
Yep.
don't even know that there's a gap yet. And it's this, I guess, slowly, eventually, the leading coaches are probably veering towards that, and use the word, they're open, that open-mindedness and humility to be like, maybe I don't know everything I need to know. And, a bit like Kobe in the gym saying, why are you doing that? Maybe looking left and right at a manager in a different league and be like, why do you spend so much time doing this? And then maybe
Yep.
I think you need a couple of pioneers to show the way. Then other people, it'll become trendy and fashionable. And mate, like, look, we're the same generation. Remember when you think back? I mean, it's incredible. If you think back to when we were studying performance sciences, like the personal development was really like, you'd read a Tony Robbins book or read Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah.
There wasn't all the podcasts, and now that how many podcasts are there about out there designed to show people ways, methods, means to improve how they go about doing whatever it is they do. It's
Yep.
like there's been this whole shift, and I feel like at a management level and coaching level, maybe there's still catching up there. But I think as this new generation comes through of coaches and leaders, I
I
expect the
think,
transition to.
yeah, I think it's also like sport, right? Like the mindset in sport sometimes can be a little bit like self-limiting. And I think in the business and corporate world, like sometimes they're not afraid. Now, sometimes your top executives, they're like, oh no, this is what my subordinates need, and we'll go get them better at communication. They don't always necessarily flip it on themselves,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, but but at least they take that development relatively serious, right? And
sure.
they're not afraid to bring in outside experts to help bolster their team's performance. I still think though in sport, bringing in these outside people that aren't Because what you see
You're
a
not a
lot.
football guy or not a basketball
Exactly.
guy.
You're
Yeah,
not a
yeah.
football guy.
What can
Yeah,
they
yeah,
teach us? They're from, yeah, yeah,
exactly. So
totally
I
get
still
you.
think you see that. So it's still like closed-minded in that perspective. Like they might even recognize that there is a gap, but either they're too afraid to kind of let an outsider in, or then they go try and find someone within that world who can fill that gap. But the reason why that gap is because there isn't anyone in that world that
Yeah.
fills it. So
One
it's
organization I was working with, actually, we talked about, psychological skills training, and the guy was like, look, there's no chance in hell you're going to get anyone in this organization to engage in that. I was like, you want to bet? And I can't say which organization it was, but long and short was 3 years later, we did this. We got the opportunity to do and launch this properly. And we had, and the condition was that people only engage in the psychological skills programming, which is one-to-one coaching with a performance psychologist. And they only engaged if it had to be voluntary. So they had to get up, walk to the end of the room, and voluntarily write their name down and their contact details for the coach to get in contact with them to book a session. And we had a 90% engagement. And I grabbed that slice of paper. I was like, have that. It can be done. Yeah,
yep.
it can be done, but there are some big obstacles. But I think as this new generation comes through, and more people like yourself are getting the message out there, and it's just a matter of time. I think there'll be smoking guns in terms of the teams that do this and do
Yep.
engage in this. The performance will be there, and then, like with everything else, performance related, everyone will then copy paste.
Yep. And look, there are some teams that are doing some of the things that we're talking about, and
Yeah.
they are having tremendous success in that.
Do you
It's
think
also,
though? So here's the interesting one. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but like,
oh,
uh, a good friend of mine introduced. Well, he described something that I've experienced so much from my career. And he talked about the concept of being yared off. And I don't know if you've heard of this one, but
no.
it's effectively you go in and they'll do the token. Oh yeah, we're open minded. We'll bring in a consultant from, I don't know, the police or performing arts, or if it's business, maybe sport. And they sort of they do the half-day workshop, and they're like, yeah, no, we do that. We get experts in. But in reality, they're just sort of yaring you off. Like, yeah, we do that. They just sit there, do the token. Well, I sat
Yep.
there, I listened. Yeah, it was quite interesting. They don't actually do that. And it's that word you were talking about, Keith, which I think is so important. It's that active search. They're not doing what Kobe would do in that room. Why? How? Why did you do this? Why not that? When is that not useful? So when should you do it? There's not that second level thinking, I think, a lot of the time. It's sort of like the token, yeah, we'll get them in. It's like, no, it's also your job is to pull the
For
learning
sure.
out of these individuals, right?
Yep. And
Um,
figure out how it works in. So I worked with a team again, very much to that, analogy there. I worked with a team, and everyone just, the coaches, they're so open. They're so open to like every idea, and that like, yeah. And and as I started to have a conversation and just talk about different ideas, again, oh yeah, and nothing would ever happen. Nothing would ever
yeah,
happen. And it took me a few times to realize, like, oh, they're not open. They're just approachable. Like you can
yeah,
you can approach them with
and
any
polite.
idea, and they'll sit and they'll listen and be like, oh, but that doesn't mean they're open to the idea. They'll be happy to. There's
It could
a
be a
nice
shit idea, and they'll be,
yep,
oh yeah, it's like a
yeah,
default.
great,
Yeah,
great. Again, so I started to use that like terminology. I'm like, no, stop saying open, just approachable. And those are two very different things. Very different things.
yeah, it's so interesting. But yeah, I'm really interested to see 5 years. I mean, I think the human performance as a whole is accelerating real quick. And I think the adoption of this sort of stuff's got to continue to accelerate. I think there'll be a couple of standout coaches over the next 3 to 5 years across multiple leagues that will set the standard in that. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is, other side of competing and training, rest and recovery. You know, how do you do that yourself? Because I know that whenever we catch up, you're on a different, well, at least state, often continent. So, how do you look after yourself physically, mentally, emotionally with the role you have in terms of the amount of travel? I know, like, you've obviously recently left Nike, but in that role, you're 1 minute you're at Cobham with Chelsea, the next minute you're again an NBA team, then you're in Australia. Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, sometimes not well. Right? Like
Okay.
I would love to be like, oh man, I wake up every morning at this time and I do this and I do my breath work and I do that. Like
Yeah.
it's not reality. I'm trying. I fluctuate through periods of really sort of focused work, and then periods where I'm just trying to like get it in. And if I used to beat myself up about it. In all honesty, like I would be like, oh man, I didn't do this today. I've gotten a little bit softer on myself, and maybe that speaks to the how do I deal with the emotional of it. So like I'm not gonna beat myself up anymore. And if I could just get out and go for a 2 mile walk, like cool, all right, I
Okay.
did
So
something,
sometimes
right?
that's just a win.
That's a win. And I'm coming off right now a brutal travel schedule that we
Yeah.
talked about the other day, the last really 2 months, but really 6 weeks of really difficult. And I was shit at doing, taking care of myself. And it probably led to some of the reason why I was just like so worn down mentally and physically. But I'm home now for a bit. So this week I've been home and I've been back on my routine
And
every
this
day.
is you structuring your routine again, so you have that period to get back on top.
Yeah. And look, I've never been one, well, I go through periods, but like of a hard training routine, it's tough for me to do. If I'm being like, I know I do that for athletes, but that's why it makes it tough for me to do. Because like I sometimes I want to just like again, I was joking with someone a couple months ago because I was doing like a Peloton class, and they were like, "Dude, what are you doing a Peloton class for? Like a cycling class?"
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
said, "Because I don't want to have to think. Like I do that for
Yeah.
for people all day long. Like sometimes, dude, just yeah, okay. Tell me to push this hard. Tell me to back. Tell me to stand up. Tell me to like, cool. I'm happy with that. So I think sometimes I can also kind of
Beautiful to sometimes subordinate that. I think that's such an important point for people listening here that if you do struggle, well, firstly, like you said, sometimes just do something. The 1 mile, 2 mile is a win. But the second thing that I think Keith's saying there that is banging is like subordinate the willpower aspect. And that is what, and again, you get abuse from people, yes, the C coaches I've sort of worked with. And, if I'm saying like I'm diving in a CrossFit class or a high rocks class or like a Peloton, but sometimes I just need to not think. I just
Yep.
need to turn up and someone takes control and just tells you what to do. So that complete emotional, mental disengagement. And it is exercise. You're exercising almost your demons without having to think or go into a gym. What do we need to do? What should I mobilize? What injuries I've got? It's just making it simple, isn't it?
And we talked about that endurance event, and it's basically they do a few of them each summer, and they're at a mountain and like a ski resort in the US, and
What
basically
resort
the
is it?
20 which one?
Which resort is it?
It moves around. Well, they
Oh,
do it
okay.
at a few different ones, right? So the one I did previously, the last 2 years, was at Snow Basin in Utah. The one I did this year was at Sun Valley in Idaho. And
Beautiful.
and the premise of it is you basically have to hike up the mountain, you take the lift down, and you do as many ascents as the equivalent of Mount Everest. So 29,029 feet, right? And you have 36 hours to do the event. Um, the first year I did it 3 years ago, I've never been in such a mental and physical dark place as I was during that. Like it just, I thought I was just gonna come in and just this is easy. I had no problem.
Nike
And
performance guy. Yeah.
and it hit me in the face. And then but I was able to fortunate. I was able to get out of that
Talk
sort
us how
of
you
dark.
talk us because I remember us debriefing this, but talk to us about how you got through that because when you've been kicked in the nuts like that and you're 6 hours in, you got another 30 to go. That's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it was, I mean, look, there was a couple tactical things. I went, took a cold shower. That like gave me like a little bit of a new, like sort of, oh, okay, cool. I'm not as hot, and I'm not as like, there were things like that. But the biggest one is the people, right? So my roommate at the time, who I still talk to, because you basically you're intensive 3 and whatnot. And
Yeah,
again, if you want to go sleep for 30 hours and try and knock it out in 6, by all means, go for it. If you
got
want to
you.
take a 3-hour break in the middle of it, knock yourself. You've got 36 hours to get it done. But as I went out that first morning, one of my roommates who had done it previously, he said, hey, can I give you some advice? And again, I'm from Boston. I'm like, what the fuck is this guy gonna tell me? And right, like, and he said, one of the things he said was, don't go alone. Like, always hike with someone.
Yeah.
And I paid that. The amount of things I've done solo in my life, like I played more rounds of solo golf than you could think of, because I don't mind being by myself.
Yeah.
So I paid that. That was the least thing I thought about. But as I came out of this hole, and I'm like, I got to get back up. He was at the starting line with me. He was kind of gearing up to go up, and we were at the same number rep
Yeah.
wise. And he was like, hey, and we did that together. And I never left his side until we finished 35 hours. Like, we finished the event with an hour to spare.
Amazing.
And it was just like, to be able to communicate with him along the way, to just take my mind off something if we were talking about life and what, like, it had a huge effect. And then I did it the next year. I didn't finish. I was on it. I think,
Yeah, I
look,
remember.
I could blame like the headache and things like that, but I ultimately think, like, mentally, I couldn't come out of the hole that time.
Yeah.
And then I did it this year, which is a little bit of
You
a
went back
redemption.
though, didn't you?
Went back in part because of like what we talked about there, right? Like, about the training. Like, you don't have to think in this event. You
Mhm.
just get up that mountain. Each mountain in each course is the one in Utah was 13 reps. This one that I did this year was 15 reps, because the distance and then the elevation
Sure.
change each mountain, right? Changes how quickly you can get to 29,000 feet. But there it is. Hike up it 15 times. You got 36 hours, go. Right. That is the only thing that you have to sort of contemplate and figure out. And there's something really interesting in that it's a really cool experience to do it.
Absolutely.
And the perspective it brings. I think I talked about this with several people, is, you just see all walks of life at this event,
Yeah.
people who you look at, and you're just like, there's no chance they finish this. They're overweight, they're old, they're this, that. And sure enough,
Looks
like,
can
they
be
finish.
this
Yeah. And oftentimes they do it faster than me. Not that it's a race, but
sure.
it just makes me step back and be like, wow, like, it's really interesting, sort of what humans can do when they just either have the right motivation, when they just put their minds to it, things like that. So again, I try and if I can introduce more of that into my training, I try to.
It's so good, I think, to have something like that a year, and it obviously doesn't have to be that extreme. But I do think, and we had Joe DeSena on, the CEO of Spartan Races,
Yep.
and we were just talking about, that there's no pleasure without pain. And every now and then it's good to just put yourself through some form of hardship, proportionate to where you're at in life,
Sure.
but just to stretch yourself. And how good is it when you finish something like that though, and you put your feet up, you have that sip of water, like it's like
It's amazing.
it's it's like
it,
being given
it
a
takes me several days, at least in the last 3 years. And again, okay, 2 years ago, I was really disappointed at myself, but just not,
yeah, I
again,
remember.
as I said, they're trying to give myself a little bit more forgiveness and things, not beat
You were
myself up, but
also, by the way, though, being like, I want to drill down on this. What happened?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, 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 for
that's
sure.
very true.
Like,
Yeah.
that's why, like, behind me, I don't know if you can see it, but there's the red hats over my shoulder.
Yes.
That signifies that you completed it. But there's also framed, which I'm not sure if you can see it. That's the bib of when I didn't finish. So
Oh, I love that.
um and just kind of, I framed that there last year afterwards, just to give myself like a daily reminder of like, hey, fuck, you didn't do that one. Like, what are you gonna do now?
I love that,
And,
Keith. It reminds me of
and it does. Go ahead.
no, I was just say actually, it reminds me of John Terry, former Chelsea and England captain. It's just sad for me as a Chelsea fan, but we lost the Champions League final. He missed a penalty kick against Manchester United. He slipped, and the ball just skied it over the bar. And he had the shirt he wore that night framed. And every time he walked in his house, boom, the first thing he'd see coming in. And yeah, there's something I like about that.
Yeah.
There's
Just a
lessons
little
in.
reminder. Just a little reminder. Doesn't always go according to plan.
Absolutely. Cool. And then what the other side for you, obviously, I know you love your skiing. I know your boys are into their snow sports as well. And
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
every time whenever we catch up and you've spent time doing that with them, I can hear it in your voice. But That's one of the ways from an emotional perspective you switch off. Is that a family thing for you? Is that off switch how you do that?
Yeah, try to, right? I'm still trying to get better, which look, it is a struggle for me. I'm not gonna lie, to have an off switch.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Feel you.
it's just something like I'm just always like, okay, what, like I can shut it off for a little bit, but then I get antsy, and I'm trying to get better at being a little bit more, at ease with
You should set up
shutting
a
it down.
support group, mate.
But yeah, but getting that was arguably the best part of COVID in that whole
Okay.
experience. My boys not going to school, or they did sort of, we did this sort of pod with some other families, but they didn't have school on Fridays. That sort of year, everything shut down. And so that year, every Friday from December through till damn near April, we skied. And it
Oh,
was unbelievable. It was so much fun. My boys got really into it, and now we try and take it in the winter once a month. We go to a bigger mountain. We explore out and go to different ones, and we make it fun. My wife doesn't ski, but she gets involved because at the end of the ski season, we each nominate 3 places we want to go the next year. We throw them in a
okay.
fishbowl. My wife picks them out, right? And it's just fun, right? To go and kind of just hang out with just do a little boys trip.
Give
Yeah,
your wife some
it's
peace as
definitely
well.
been,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And then I guess flipping that question to, I imagine it's some of the same things, but in terms of the top athletes you work with, again across the domains, how do you think how good are they? Because we talked about, and I think these top athletes, in my experience anyway, they're good with the on switch, and the top ones are good with the control. They're incredibly stoic in those moments and able to, but the off switch. How what's your experience with the top guys on that? Are they good, bad, somewhere in the middle? Is there anything you see them do that you think's again different from the guys that are still, elite? But
No, I think part of, unfortunately, what makes them elite is
yeah,
there isn't much of an off switch, right? There might be a dimmer. It's not a switch though.
that
Um,
active second level thing goes right. If you got it,
yeah,
it's
it's
going.
it's tough. It's tough. I mean, again, I was just last week in the Cayman Islands, right, with my family,
Yes.
and it was after a bunch of travel. And yeah, there was a little bit of work there. So yes, there was that. But I can't help when I'm like thinking about, like, I see something, I'm like, ooh, like that's a really interesting idea. Like, how could I like it? Yeah, your mind, I think, is always just going. I think if you really love what you do, right?
Of
So
course.
sometimes it makes it tough to shut it off. Again, trying to get better at it. Um, I think for
Yeah.
me, the way in which I'm going to try and, I guess, or at least the way I'm trying to, is how much on the front end can I do to like give myself the space to be okay with like shutting it down a bit. But to the athlete part of your question, yeah, I've the ones who are operating at the highest level, they struggle to take some downtime.
Yeah.
They struggle. They can do it because they have the freedom, not only financially, but sometimes just lifestyle to do it. But they're still always, sort of,
Looking
you see it
over.
humming in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think again for people listening, I agree with you completely. And I think if you're that way, if you're wired that way as well, I think a couple of things that I think have been useful for me is exactly like you said there, Keith. So for instance, if I want to be able to relax on a Saturday afternoon, I get up and I get my training done and I bang out a couple of hours of work at least in the morning, because then I feel like, okay, you're in front of it again, linking to what you said. And then also like trying to keep yourself busy, engage your mind in something, and you're probably going to do that second level thinking in that. But sometimes the change is as good as a break, right? Have that air quote hobby that you can engage time in, like get around the golf course, even on your own.
Yeah.
And you're probably like
Golf.
smashing yourself to bits with critics, looking for ways to optimize that. But it is at least still switching channels, right?
Yeah, look, it's funny you mentioned golf, because golf, I think we've talked about it, in some of our other conversations, but golf for me is definitely that.
Mm.
Which maybe also right now why
Seems
I
to be for a
maybe I
lot of
feel like
people. It seems to be.
yeah,
I don't play
it,
golf,
it,
but
it is. Well, I think so. I think some people, they beat themselves up to what you just said. So maybe it's supposed to be that, but it doesn't become that.
yeah,
And yes, I'm competitive and I like to play, but I love to just go practice. Like, I love
yeah,
just going out in solitude and working on my putting, or just hitting balls and just chipping it. Like, that is very peaceful for me.
Mm.
The tough part though is the last probably 2 years, certainly 18 months, but probably a little bit longer. I've played 9 holes of golf. I haven't given myself the opportunity to go do that. And that is, I know that, a
Mhm.
very sort of um, special place for me, in place where I can go shut it off. I can mentally just kind of take myself somewhere else. So it's one thing where, again, moving forward,
Yeah.
especially now I'm home, I need to go back out there.
Yeah, make sure you do it. And I think, again, for anyone listening, whatever your golf is, you've got to structure that as
Yeah.
much as you structure your sort of training, your work, and your competition. Um, and then, okay, pivot ever so slightly, Keith, just rounding up in terms of the human performance piece, what do you think are going to be the next big things in professional sport or, elite performance full stop in terms of themes emerging?
I think, some of the things.
What do you think it might look like 10 years from now at these top teams and these?
What I hope it looks like is a lot more collaboration amongst
Yes.
the organization, right? From management, coaching, and then performance staff, and all the disciplines within the performance staff. I hope that is the way it's definitely in certain clubs pushing that way, but I think sometimes it's more lip service than actually, like,
Yeah. We talked
what is
about, yeah.
actually happening. So I'd like to see that to continue to progress and take hold. Where I think you're really going to see some advances is with things that are maybe non-traditional of what you might think about from performance, like training and things like that.
Mhm.
Okay, maybe there'll be some slight advances, or maybe there'll be some technology that'll come in and help, like, optimize some things. Sure, I think that'll happen. I don't think that's going to be some major leap, though. I think where you're going to see some things is to what we talked about earlier. Like, how do you optimize learning? How do you optimize, like, some of the things like that? Um,
But going beyond the physical and technical stuff.
yeah, I think beyond, I think it'll help, especially the technical, less the
Mhm.
physical. I think the physical is going to just continue to improve because athletes are just continuing to improve, right? Like
Yeah, of course.
the athletes today who are competing in the EPL, very, very different if you go back and you look at
Oh,
film from
yeah.
the 80s, right? They don't even look like you're playing the same sport.
I saw this
Um,
hilarious meme the other day, by the way, and it reams to this. It was taking a piss about how hard it is to buy a house in the UK at the moment. And the
yeah,
meme was your parents trying to buy a house back in 1980, you trying to buy a house in 2024. And it was the Olympic gold medalist gymnast. And basically she's doing a summer, roly poly, cartwheel, and stands up. And then there was, the gold, the gold
yeah,
the other night, and it's just like doing some ridiculous routine that
unbelievable,
it looks
unbelievable.
incredible. But yeah, I mean,
And
it
I think
shows you the
yeah.
advancements on the physical side.
And I think that, yes, okay, they're taking training more serious, they're doing things, but they're just, like, I don't know, they're just different, right? Like, again, I see some high school football players walking around now at different things. I'm like, Jesus, you're like, no 16-year-olds like that when I was in high school. Like,
Yeah.
uh, and so I think that's going to continue to advance, like, however that is advancing in some aspects. But I think, some of the things that we talked about of hopefully clubs being more open to bringing in outside experts to advance the field of, again, learning. I think, virtual reality. I think there's some really interesting things that are
Yeah.
happening there that are going to help from a learning perspective in tactical aspects. I think there's things that are outside of what you traditionally look at to help athletes perform their best, that are going to take root in pro sports, and it's the teams that are going to kind of, take advantage of some of that stuff early on, that they're going to have a competitive advantage.
Massively. And what are you most excited about? What's most important to you in your career now? You talked about right at the beginning about how it's all about learning, and what's most important for you now?
I think that, again, as I sort of, take a step back here, having left Nike a few years ago, or a few months ago, sorry, and look forward what's next. Um, helping a lot of what we just talked about, right? Like, hey, I'd like to see sports continue to push forward and become
Making
more
that happen.
cohesive and collaborative, and is how can I help make that happen? Right. And I'm doing it at a smaller level, with individual teams I'm doing, but how can I kind of help push that? It's certainly not going to be only me. There's going to be a lot of people involved in kind of continuing to push that forward. But that's, I think, what excites me. I think also with the individual teams and athletes that I am working with, like how can I continue to add value and get better myself so I can help them? Is really what I'm excited about for this next part of my career.
Amazing. And Keith, if you could drill one message into people listening to this, people who want more from themselves, but perhaps have had a wobble, perhaps like you did on your second Everest ascent,
Yeah.
the ski resort, but they know they've got more to give. What would that advice be?
I think again, be curious, right? As I say that, like I think of Ted Lasso saying that, which is not my intent, but I think again that sort of curiosity for learning, for getting better, for if you had a wobble, why did I have that wobble? Like what can I learn from that experience, right? Like curiosity from a learning perspective, I think is something that I wish more people did. Right. I think being able to whether it's reflect
Yeah,
on an experience and what can I learn from it, and then okay, cool, being curious enough to how do I then improve upon it. That's one thing that I guess it's always maybe become somewhat natural to me, but now more than ever, as I explore what else I want, like I'm trying to like okay, hey, what other questions can I ask of myself and of others to push the envelope to help me. So I think if there's one thing I would love to kind of press on others, it would be just don't be afraid to ask some questions.
love that. And I just want to finish up with some quick fire questions.
I love it.
Favorite movie?
Goodwill Hunting is up there.
Nice.
Rounders is up there. But yeah, I might say Goodwill Hunting.
Good shout. Favorite TV series?
Seinfeld.
Excellent choice. Book?
Book. I don't know. I might say like there was one, and now the name escapes me because it was an amazing book. It wasn't like if you're talking just like a fun book, man, I loved Harry Potter. I loved it.
Okay,
Phenomenal.
yeah,
So
brilliant.
I might put Harry Potter up there. There's another one that I will message you about.
Yeah,
That
no,
was
no worries. We'll stick
so,
in the show notes. Do you have a favorite quote? It's not
yeah,
just it, is it?
one of the ones from which speaks to some of what I just talked about there. So you can't solve your problems with the same thinking you used when you created them. It's an Einstein. It's a quote from Einstein.
Yeah,
That's one that definitely resonates with me, right? In terms of that curiosity of like, all right, well,
makes total sense. Love it. Greatest athlete of all time?
Kobe.
Yeah. Greatest leader of all time?
Oof. Not sure. I don't know if I could pick one there. I think there's been some really I Churchill is I've been fascinated with
Yeah.
over the last few years and reading a ton of his biography and all these things. So like there's just some really interesting things. He's probably wasn't perfect in life, but he's
No,
one that
certainly not.
stands out, right?
Cool. And is there a team, greatest team of all time?
Tough to argue with some of Jordan's like Bulls,
Yeah.
especially if you ever watched The Last Dance. Like what a
It's
phenomenal
amazing. If you haven't watched
documentary.
that, by the way, you need to. Last
Oh,
Dance on
you have to.
Netflix. It's
You have to.
incredible.
And when I started watching that, I wasn't like I was like, oh, this is but it was captivating.
Would you say that
So
that's one of
probably
the
tough.
best series in terms of documenting the reality of what actually goes on behind the scenes? And I know it's, a while back now, but I felt like it was a real accurate reflection of the good, the bad, and the ugly of elite sport.
Yeah, I thought it did a phenomenal job. There's a
Yeah.
couple. The other one that I think is, which is an amazing documentary, right? So, if you were going to probably ask me, favorite movie, it wouldn't might not be up there, but favorite documentary is Icarus, which I think
Oh, okay.
shows. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just phenomenal. I was just
Yeah,
talking about that
definitely.
the other night, but yeah, that from a sporting one, I also think some of those the Hard Knocks series,
Mhm.
I kind of got away from it, but then, and I'm sure some of it is somewhat sensationalized, but they just do a really good job of showing kind of people who don't know, like
Yeah,
the realities of behind the scenes. But yeah, that Last Dance was phenomenal.
absolutely. And is there any, if you could have a coffee or a beer, whatever you fancy, with a historical figure, is there anyone that you'd choose?
Um, Marcus Aurelius.
Nice.
Right. Like I just like some of the stuff with Stoics, the
Yeah, of
Stoics
course.
and all this stuff. Like I'd love to just sit down with him and just like actually just really hear him
Hear it from the
speak,
horse's mouth. Yeah.
hear it from the horse's
Northern
mouth and
Lion
just
holiday.
understand like,
Yeah.
that at that time period, having that like level of thinking in foresight of things that are so applicable today is just fascinating to me.
Yeah. Keith, I want to say a massive thank you.
Thank
For me
you.
personally, it's always amazing catching up with you, but this has been a brilliant conversation. I'm sure people are going to get a lot of value out of it. But yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Awesome. Really appreciate having me.
Cheers, Keith. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. I love this topic of human performance and excellence, and I've been engaged in it neurotically for the last 20 years. It's a sincere privilege to have the opportunity to share my knowledge, network, and learnings with you. Now, go and put the principles to work. Make sure you let us know what resonates. Reach out with questions, blind spots. We've got you covered. Remember, excellence is just a series of days repeated over and over again. Now go and win your day. In 2021, I published my first book, Accelerating Excellence. If you're finding the conversations and information on this podcast useful, you might want a physical reference point and to gain even deeper awareness of the concepts discussed. The book's actually more of an operation manual containing more detail with a step-by-step guide on how to implement all this stuff so you can get maximum benefit, which was one of my main motivations in writing it. Yes, I want the podcast and the book to be inspiring and entertaining, but it was non-negotiable for me to make sure that the listener or reader is provided with a structure and direction in terms of actually putting this stuff to work. The book's called Accelerating Excellence. It's a #1 international bestseller. And if you're moving from more than just interest towards implementation, I think you'll really enjoy it. Like everything I do, the book is evidence-based, but practice-led, drawing on my experience working with some of the world's most elite, exclusive, high-performing teams and individuals. It's filled with highly actionable strategies you can apply today to become better tomorrow. If this sounds like something from you, see the link in description where you can download 6 chapters of the book for free in either audio or digital format. It's also available to purchase on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and at your local bookstore. I hope you enjoy. By now, we all know the importance of a winning mindset. We're bombarded with elite performers telling us that mindset's what separates the best from the rest. That if we want to be successful, we need to be more confident, resilient, and motivated. And of course, when panic strikes, we need to calm down, relax, or chill out. Great, we get it. But the question is how? We're given this guidance with almost zero practical advice in terms of how to achieve it. Where can we actually go to develop that world-class mindset? What's the back squat for resilience, the bench press for confidence, and the bicep curl for positive thinking? Well, that's why I created the Mindset app. Through the app, you'll gain access to the psychological skills training used by world champion athletes, special forces operators, and some of the world's most successful traders and investors. The reality is these guys pay me a fortune to help them get this right. But the thing is, these skills are equally, if not more important for the aspiring athlete, executive, or operator. And that's exactly why I created this app. I want these tools and training available to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Mindset is a skill, and like any skill, it can be developed with the right strategy and effort. The tools and techniques are designed in a way that will literally rewire your brain, like learning to ride a bike or drive a car. All the techniques are designed with creating a high-performing, self-regulating you 2.0. Every strategy in the Mindset app is backed by empirical research. There's 10-minute emotional control training exercises that have been shown to increase your ability to overcome detrimental decision-making biases by up to 80%. In another study, just 3 weeks of executing visualization training led to 34% improvements in performance. Another research group found 50% greater improvements in the rate of learning. And just a few weeks of performing visualization led to 22% reductions in anxiety and 21% increases in confidence. These numbers are phenomenal, and I've never met an elite performer in any domain that can afford to be missing out on this type of edge. What I love most is that we've structured everything so that you don't need to carve out an extra hour in your day to get this done. Small bite-sized chunks of 5 to 10 minutes are all it takes. In fact, I'd only encourage you to use the tool on your commute, in the sauna, at the end of your working day, or bolt it onto the end of your gym session. Any dead time you have can now immediately be transformed to deliver you extreme performance gains. My goal is to remove every possible obstacle to your development. And with that in mind, the basic package is completely free. Visit the link in description and sign up for our pre-launch free emotional control, visualization, and performance routine programs.